Hi, I'm Lisa Dempster, and I'm very excited to be here today talking with the actor extraordinaire John Wood about his memoir, How I Clawed My Way to the Middle. John, reading your memoir, it's very clear that you have such a strong passion for the theatre. What was it like being, I guess, a theatre actor and embodying those roles like Hamlet that have sort of so much weight and history behind them?
It's very interesting to play Hamlet because it's been done so many times before. And, I got probably the worst review I ever had in my entire career from Harry Kippax, who was the head critic on the Sydney Morning Herald. I think he said, so you don't send a music student out to do the clavier, so you don't let people like John Wood loose on a stage playing Hamlet. And basically what he's, yeah, it's ouch indeed. But one of the things that we did was, Hamlet's so happy about trapping Claudius during the, in the play within the play, that maybe he sings some of the lines. Hey, I can't even remember what the lines are now, but several years later I saw Nicole Williamson's production of Hamlet. And Nicole Williamson, his production was very famous at the time we did ours. And I remember seeing it several years later on television, and he did the same thing. Everybody thought that was genius, that he did it. And I certainly wasn't copying him because I didn't know what he'd done. But he forgot his lines one night, and it started to do. I don't think it was the to be or not to be speech. It was oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. That thing was, and he just walked off. And if I'd done that, I would have been crucified.
No, I was going to say, how does that go down in a live performance?
Well, apparently the people in New York didn't mind it, but the great thing about the greatest thing about that was that many years later, many years later, I was on tour with either the club or a show called Carpe Diem, which was a men's health play. A woman came up to me, she would have been in her 40s, and she had seen my Hamlet as a schoolgirl, and it changed her life.
Oh, how wonderful.
And you think, like it actually really did speak to the school students that saw it. And I mean, she wasn't the only example of someone that came up to me and said that. And so I sort of felt a certain pride that I'd helped them understand that great play, despite Mr. Kippax's misgivings.
And as an actor, how do you prepare to embody a character, particularly in theatre, which is such a visceral experience, such a being a live experience?
Look, you've got a rehearsal period in which to do it, and you've got a director advising you on things that you're missing in the text, and in some cases they will say things to you. The director will say things to you that you hadn't even thought of, that hadn't even occurred to you, and you think, oh, okay, I'll try and do it like that. Do it another way, or do it, whatever the feeling is. And so you've got a fair bit of time, and you've got there's always, with anything to do with Shakespeare, there's a lot of information that you can read about. Indeed. I'm just at the moment reading Isaac Asimov's Guide to Shakespeare. It's huge, but it's Asimov is, was a fairly giant brain in his own right, and I don't know how well I'm understanding it, with Shakespeare's brain on the one hand and Asimov's on the other, and then my poor brain in the middle. But it's there's a tremendous amount of information you can get out of books and notes and goodness knows what, and and when you approach it the same way as you approach any play, what's he feeling like in the scene with his mother, in the bedroom? Then, what does he feel when he goes on to kill Polonius? And you approach it in the same way as you approach the emotions or temperament of any character that you're playing. And if you get into the right space, the right headspace, it all seems to just gel. And if the play's working right, you know, people say, oh, how do you remember all the lines? If the play's working properly and everybody's in the same mood, the mood that you've all decided on in the rehearsal period, and somebody asks you a question or makes a statement, then there's usually only one response that you can have, and that's the response that's been written for you. And it's simply a question of getting, you know, all those markers happening, and then, you know, of course, you do the odd warm-up, you know, like when we were doing the live episode of Blue Healers, which was seen as something of a, you know, gosh, wow, a live episode of television. Well, that's how they used to do all television. We did the first live episode of anything for 30 or 40 years. And I remember bumping into Marty Sachs behind the set somewhere, you know, like just before we were about to go to air, you know, and it was really genuinely live, and we're both doing voice exercises, which on television, of course, you don't need because you've got microphones that pick up every nuance of sound and every stomach rumble, and every time you bump the lead. And but, you know, like we were obviously both so nervous that we were doing voice exercises, which was totally unnecessary because there was no projection involved at all.
And what was it like going from being a theatre actor to acting for TV, playing in some of the, you know, most iconic TV shows, Rafferty's Rules and Blue Healers?
I'm not really sure what there obviously is a difference, and I'm not sure how big the difference is, which is probably why I don't get much work in movies, because I don't know the difference between no, and you know the thing you always forget, the one lesson that I did have about acting is that, you know, if you raise your eyebrow, you know, and I'm not very good at raising one eyebrow and not the other, but if you raise your eyebrow on camera, you know, like that's on a screen, and every time you move anything on your face, it's this huge, huge response, which, of course, in the theatre, you know, you can't see. You're not seeing something 40 feet wide. What you're seeing is just this little head here, and the eyebrows go up, and it's almost imperceptible. And on stage, on television, you know, like if you think about television, and, you know, we do a lot of close-ups on television, but for the most part, if you're running around on television, you're about that big. You know, you're an inch tall, you know, and that's your whole body. You know, so there are big differences in the way things occur, and, you know, people in the front row get a very different perspective on a performance to the people in the back row or up in the gods. You know, it's you know, if you're up in the gods, you're basically looking down on people's heads. You know, so which is why actors, of course, when they're on stage, work like that. You know, so they actually give some of their face to the people up there in the gods. But you know, at the same time, you've got to be within the character and within that character's emotional train of thought, and, you know, so there's a bit of technique involved. And I don't know whether, you know, like for me, I think it mostly comes naturally. You know, like it's. Television, I don't do anything much different for television than I do on stage. You know, so I guess I'm a bit big on telly even, you know, let alone the movies. And one of the great things I've always felt was that Rafferty's Rules was enormously successful, but the four central characters, myself as Rafferty, Catherine Wilkin as Pauline, Simon Chilvers as Sergeant Flicker, and Archie Michael as Fulvio, was that we were all basically theatre actors.
Right.
And we had a great relationship with each other. And we were, you know, Simon and Kate and I particularly were used to working with each other on stage at the Melbourne Theatre Company, despite the fact that this was shot in Sydney, of course. You know, despite the fact that our performances were quite theatrical in the courtroom context, that they worked exceptionally well, and people really loved those characters, especially Fulvio. People just adored Fulvio, and Archie was just a master of comic timing. Just so funny, such a funny guy.
I mean, you're one of the most recognisable faces in Australian TV, which I assume doesn't happen so much in the theatre. What is it like being sort of recognised by audiences and being such a strong part of public life, essentially?
For the most part, people are very generous, you know, and they somehow respect the authority figures, despite the fact that they themselves may be criminals. You know, like the number of people that I've met in the course of doing something not legal. I remember walking past Flinders Street Station one day on my way down to go and get on the train. Somebody came running up and just leapt over the glass partition, and he landed at my feet and he went, oh God, sorry. And I thought, it's all right, mate, I'm not a real cop. And I remember again one day shooting an episode of Rafferty's Rules. We were on the steps of Manly Courthouse, and I was waiting to do something, and for some reason the court was in session that day. We usually shot when the court was not in session, and for some reason there were heaps and heaps of people about, and we had to keep waiting until groups had gone through. It's nice to be recognised. I mean, in the beginning it's something that you're not expecting, you know, and it's more irritating for the people who are with you than for you yourself, you know. Like, I don't think my wife enjoys it much, and kids and grandkids, you know, I don't know what they think, but it's funny, you know, like my granddaughter, I was picking her up from school one day, and she was with one of her friends, and the friend's mother, whom I didn't know, but my daughter had brought one of the books home for me to sign to her, and I'd signed it to this woman whom I didn't know, and she came rushing over and started talking to me and thanking me profusely for signing the book. I thought, yeah, that's all right. And blah, blah. She went and got in the car, and my granddaughter said, "How famous are you?" And I couldn't tell her. I mean, I wouldn't have a clue. For the most part, it's really quite nice because people like the characters, and, you know, I've never had anybody come up with a gun and say, "I've always wanted to shoot you, you copper bastard." But, you know, that's more good luck than good management, I think. But it's quite pleasant, and, you know, then when it doesn't happen at all...
That's even worse, isn't it?
They've forgotten me already? No, it's not quite like that. But I was in St Kilda the other day, 2 days ago. We did a reading of a new play at the Alex Theatre, and had a coffee out on the street next door to the George Hotel, and I said, this is just like, you know, people have been nodding to me and saying hello, and it just didn't occur to me. I thought, this is just like home. It's such a homely place. And they said, well, it's only because they know you. Oh, yes, okay, stupid man, but I was amazed at the level of recognition.
So, John, you've written the memoir, How I Clawed My Way to the Middle. When you look back on your career, which has been such a long and successful career, what do you think about it? What's your feeling about all those decades?
Well, there's a certain level of pride. With a show like Blue Heelers, for example, you know, you expect maybe to get a season out of it, which is 13 weeks. And we did 12 years, you know, 510 episodes or something. And with Rafferty's, we did 110 episodes. And it's, you know, the expectation is you might get 3 months' work. And with Rafferty's, I got 5 years, and with Blue Heelers, I got 12 years. And but the expectation is normally, you know, like with theatre, you do 4 weeks rehearsal, and then maybe 6 to 8 weeks playing, and And you create this situation in the rehearsal space, and then you come on stage and you do it with an audience, and there's a tremendous closeness about that group of people working together, and it's always quite heartbreaking when it finishes. You know, the end is always, for everyone, quite a wrench. You know, but you know it's going to finish. You know, you've got 8 weeks, and then that'll be it. And maybe you'll do a tour, maybe you'll tour to another city or another state, but mostly it just finishes, and it always comes as a bit of a shock and a heartbreak that it does finish, and then you're out of work. And you promise undying love to each other and look forward to working together again. And in 99% of cases, you never even see each other again. But then, you know, you meet 10, 15 years down the track and you feel that bond, and because you have done something like that together. And I mean, it's a great industry, and it's very emotionally rewarding. And I absolutely adore working on stage. I'm aware now of how important it is, and you know, if you've got something important to say. When I was young, if you had anything important to say, you copied Bob Dylan and wrote songs. And if you have anything important to say now, and for the last 40 years, last 30 years, you work on television. You know, like, that's where the audience is, sitting at home watching you making a fool of yourself.
Now, John, you've done acting, you've written a memoir. My final question to you is, what does the last chapter, or the next chapter for John Wood hold?
The next chapter, yes, let's not think of it as the last chapter.
Excuse me.
No, well, look, since the COVID thing, everybody would be well aware that the arts industry has been totally wiped out. I don't know when theatres will open again and operate fully. There's a good chance it won't happen this year. I'm about to do a show with Max Gillies and Jean Kitson called Mono, which I believe is a fairly unfortunate phrase these days, because it's got something to do with cold sores, but it's basically a series of monologues that the three of us do. And
Oh, fantastic.
And that starts rehearsing at the end, or the 1st of March. We start rehearsing that. We play Sydney and the regions of New South Wales. We play Dubbo, and we open in Wyong, which is just south of Newcastle, near Gosford. And then we do Dubbo and Orange and Bathurst, and come back into Sydney and do Penrith and Glen Street. But it's encouraging that the theatres may be allowed to be full, and that people may even want to come and see us. You never know.
Indeed. Thank you so much for your time today, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.